What I want to talk about today is setting up the terminal node controller's audio drive level. And this is information I found on Fibo.com, written by John Ackerman, N-A-U-R. He says I'd lay reasonable odds that most 1200 baud packet radio stations are getting less range than they should and generating more retries than they need to. Why? He asks, because their TNCs are overdriving the microphone input on their radios. And then he goes on to explain basically that due to the pre-emphasis and de-emphasis that most radios apply to the signal coming in to their microphone, that can cause problems when it comes to transmitting packets, because the radio can't really distinguish between voice and packet. So to investigate this in my setup, what I've done is I've just set up the radios to ping each other as before. You can hear the pings going back and forth right now. And I looked at the received signal on one side with my oscilloscope set to look at the spectrum, in other words, the fast Fourier transform function on this oscilloscope. And I have it over here. What we see here when there is a central peak coming in is a peak at 144.8 megahertz, and that is exactly the frequency that the radio is tuned to. So when a signal comes in, we see a peak over there. I was a little bit disappointed to see that the peak has no noticeable features, because I really wanted to see a separation of the two peaks within that one peak that comprise the AFSK signal. That's the audio frequency shift keying. So audio frequency shift keying basically contains a carrier, which we see here, which is deviated, because this is FM, between 1200 Hertz for either a mark or a space, I forget now, and 2200 Hertz. So if the 1200 Hertz is a mark, the 2200 Hertz would be a space. And there's a coding technique that is used for actually encoding the bits. I think it's a non-return to zero inverted, and then that gets packaged in the AX25 protocol. So what I really wanted to see was the deviation in that carrier, but unfortunately my oscilloscope does not have the resolution to be able to see the actual deviation in that carrier. So what I'm going to do now is pause and pull up a website that'll show that deviation. So continuing, this is information I got from mcwa.org about AFSK versus FSK, and it turns out that the spectrum I was looking for should look like this. You can clearly see the two peaks. This is with a high-end test equipment, which unfortunately I don't have access to at home. But this is what I was looking for. And the main idea is to have this peak, in other words the 1200 Hertz, be greater than or at least equal to the 2200 Hertz. Because as I have read, when it's the other way around, when this higher frequency peak is greater than the lower frequency peak, problems can occur. Or at the very least, they should be near equal for proper demodulation to occur. So what I'll do now is I'll reset my oscilloscope to look at not 144.8 megahertz. I'll reset it to look at the actual audio frequencies, in other words 1200 Hertz and 2200 Hertz, and see if I can look at the levels of both of those frequencies and see if I can look at the FFT, in other words the frequency spectrum of those audio frequencies as well. So getting back to Fibo.com, when you look at the oscilloscope, the image that you want to see of the AFSK waveform should look like this. The 1200 Hertz has the same level as the 2200 Hertz. If you see anything different, then there's probably overdriving going on. So this is an example of overdriving. The low frequency has a lower peak than the higher frequency, and this would be bad from a demodulation perspective. Here's another example of a very poorly set up system. It says when the TNC is overdriving the transmitter. So this is overdriven transmitter. And then he talks about preemphasis and deemphasis as the cause. This is an example. Properly deviated radio signal, packet radio signal with preemphasis applied. And this is what it looks like when it comes out of the transmitter. Again, it's clobbered. And this is what a properly deviated signal looks like at the receiver. The deemphasis pretty much cancels out the boost that preemphasis gives to the high tone. So this is kind of what you would get with the preemphasis and deemphasis when things are at or near best they can be. Then he goes into audio clipping and the problems that can occur. This is a very good website for this kind of thing, and he explains how you might test for it. I haven't actually done what he suggests. I thought I can look at it through my scope, and here's what we see. So as he showed in his website, we have the AFSK signal. So if I were to take a single shot, we can see it doesn't look too bad. The low frequencies are a little bit higher than the high frequencies, and there's a lot of noise. I think that noise is, I'm not sure what it's caused from, but it could be just all of the noise from the wiring in my test setup. What I also have running on the bottom of the screen is the spectrum, in other words the frequency content of that signal. I'll set it to free run. There, that's free run. And when a signal is received, you can see the spectrum comes alive, and there is a dance of the information, which is basically the 1200 Hertz and the 2200 Hertz. And what I'm looking for is to see that those two peaks over here are about the same. And when they're about the same, I know that the received signal, in other words the transmitter from the other radio, the received signal is where I want it to be. And that can be repeated for the other radio, and that's how I know that the radios are not being overdriven and are optimized for packet receive and transmission.